James sat at the restaurant table, waiting on his wife to return from the ladies' room. He wasn't sure how to break the news to her that he'd received a promotion that he didn't want to turn down. His current job as head loan officer at the First National Bank was as far as he could progress here in Hagerstown, but he'd recently applied for the position of loan officer in the Baltimore branch and received his transfer approval this afternoon. He was excited about the promotion, but gloomy at the prospect of trying to convince Michelle that it was what was best for the two of them. His new salary meant that she could choose to stay home, and they could finally work toward having a family. However, Michelle had been teaching fifth grade here for almost 10 years. She might not want to give that up. He watched her walk toward the table, clearly thrilled they were eating at the nicest restaurant in town. James often stressed how eating out was not in their budget, so this was a treat indeed. Before she could stop herself, she said, "This is wonderful, James. Are you sure we can afford this?" "Yes, honey, trust me. I don't think it'll hurt our finances if we have a nice dinner just this once." Her shoulders visibly relaxed. James let her talk about her students and classes that day, while he tried to think of the best way to tell her about the promotion and necessary move. In the middle of Shula's best crab dish, Michelle sighed with pleasure and asked brightly, "So, how was your day, James?" "Funny you should ask," he began, then cleared his throat. "I've been offered a promotion to loan officer." "Really? That's wonderful, sweetheart." "You know I've been wanting to move up, but there hasn't been a lot of opportunity. They've offered me a salary that's twice what I'm earning now." Michelle smiled warmly, encouraging him to continue. "Well then, it's amazing it's finally happened. Who retired?" "That's the snag. The loan officer position is in Baltimore." He let that sink in for a few seconds. "Confused?" Michelle replied slowly. "But Baltimore is almost 2 hours away. That's an awfully long commute twice a day." A world of conversation was held silently through eye contact. "I was thinking we might find a house nearer Baltimore, maybe in the Owings Mills area. That's only about 20 miles away from work, and we wouldn't have to live right in the city. We're in a position now to start a family. It's what we've planned for years, right?" Immediately, James could tell he'd approached this the wrong way. It was too much information at once. He berated himself. He should have mentioned the position when he first heard about it. He would have had weeks to get Michelle used to the idea. Weeks for her to plan what she wanted to do for her own career. Michelle looked at him, anger beginning to take the place of confusion. He'd thought a really nice meal would help soften the blow. But too late he realized that he'd made this decision completely without her, when it affected her life and her job just as much. She sat up straighter, and in her voice was determination, a hint of steel that she'd never voiced before. "If you think that I'm unable or afraid to stand up and make a scene, then you are dead wrong, James." She paused, daring him to interrupt. James sat quietly, unwilling to put his banker's reputation on the line in such a public place. His wife continued, anger and frustration mounting. "We put off having children because you said that we weren't ready, that we didn't have the savings to provide for them yet. You decided on your own to buy the house we live in now because you said it was cheaper than rent in the long run. So I poured myself into my teaching, believing that it would fulfill me, into the decorating and taking care of the house. I thought it might be enough. And you know what, James? You know what?" She stood up and tossed her napkin onto her plate. "It hasn't fulfilled me, and it's not enough." She turned and walked stiffly toward the restaurant entrance. They drove home in silence. Michelle was sure she'd regret what came out of her mouth when she was this angry, and James didn't want to be the match to her stick of dynamite. Without asking, he took a blanket and pillow to the sofa that night. On his way to the bathroom at 5 o'clock in the morning, he paused outside the bedroom door and heard soft sobbing. Opening the door quietly, he sat gently near her and said simply, "I'm sorry." Her shoulders were shaking. She sat up and faced him, tears still streaming down her face. She spoke softly. "No, James, this is not your fault. I'm angry at myself." "But why? I'm the one who should have spoken sooner." He was more than willing to mend this problem and take his share of the blame. She couldn't meet his eyes. I, um, I should have talked to you sooner, too. I've been to a specialist, James, a fertility specialist. He did tests. He says I no longer have any viable eggs, and that's why I haven't been able to conceive. Her voice broke on the last word. Their eyes met, hers filled with tears again. I waited too long, and now I can't ever have children, James. We won't ever have a child. James opened his arms, and she leaned into him gratefully. He waited a moment, and then spoke slowly. So, when I told you that we'd have to pretty much pack up and leave your kids from school, it was too much, wasn't it? She nodded silently in the curve of his arm. He wasn't sure what to say to her to make it better. It wasn't something he could fix, and it was pure torture for him to admit that to himself. He took a deep breath. If I can't be enough family for you, honey, I'll have to accept that. You're all I need, but I understand if you want more. There's always adoption or fostering children. Whatever you need, whatever you want, I'm willing to do it. As long as you and I are together, that's all I ask. A sense of security getting stronger inside her now, Michelle scooted over in the bed and snuggled up to her husband.